الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Islamic Center at New York University podcast, coming to you straight from the heart of New York City. We're building an amazing Muslim community here at ICNYU where everyone is welcomed and respected no matter where you're from or where you're at. This is the place to be. So open your ears and your heart and come along with us on another life-changing journey. Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So we've been looking at a text that's called the Book of Assistance. It's by a sheikh by the name of Imam Haddad rahimahullah. It's a text on spirituality, and it presents kind of a roadmap for an individual to engage in a deliberate process of spiritual increase through very easily digestible chapters. And we are on the fourth chapter, the chapter on the inner self and the outer self. So before this, we went through the first chapters on yaqeen, certitude. It's just deep, kind of confirmed faith, right? The way that you all have reasonable faith exerted throughout the course of your day. You believe that when you turn the light switch on in your homes, you come into this place and hit a light switch. You go to make wudu in the wudu rooms. You think water is going to come out, the lights are going to turn on. Yaqeen is having a deep faith in Allah. The way that you believe the lights are going to turn on when you hit the light switch, you have that kind of faith in God and what it is that He promises and offers to you. Right? You have then a chapter 2 that's on niyyah, intention. So yaqeen is set as a destination, right? The idea that we're all entering and kind of traversing at different starting points, but we have a common goal, that we want to have a deep, kind of soundly rooted faith. You know, we want to have a certitude that is called yaqeen. Then that niyyah, that intention, is an understanding that before you go out on this spiritual journey, you're going out and traversing the world, you're walking through this world, you know why you're doing what you're doing, you're bringing kind of presence and consciousness to your actions. You're not running just on default settings, doing things habitually or instinctively, but there's a certain wakefulness to your engagement of the world. And then it goes into muraqabah, which essentially is translated in the text as vigilance. But you're looking over your heart, so your heart looks over you. And that heart's in a state of wakefulness. It is functioning in a way where it's not in a slumber, and it's aware of the divine, right? That you are linked to Allah wherever it is that you are. And not in a way that creates trepidation or intimidation, you're walking on eggshells, but you find a sense of strength and empowerment through that relationship. And those first 3 chapters are rooted now in actions relevant to the heart. And now this 4th chapter, the inner self, the outer self, it gives us a little bit different of an opportunity of engagement that's not focused only on actions of the heart, but is introducing us as an entire being that is now kind of making a journey, so to speak, right? And we went through the first few paragraphs of this chapter. It's a really short chapter, and it talks about the relationship of the outward and the inward. What we want to get into today was a little bit more about now how our outer and inner can connect. And we talked last week about the different elements that make us who we are inwardly, right? That you have a heart within yourself, you have memories within yourself, you have thoughts within yourself, you have feelings within yourself. You also have the nafs, you have the ruh, the soul, the lower self. You have irada, sheer will and determination. You have aql, you have intellect. The intrinsic link now between the outer and the inner has to be understood, though, consciously. And where there's connecting points from the physical self to the spiritual self that our tradition outlines. And if you don't have consciousness of it, it doesn't mean that, one, you're still not impacted consequently by the relationship, and two, if there's not awareness by the individual, Shaitan still has an understanding of how the outer links to the inner. And our tradition gives us distinct specifics of things that we want to be mindful of, that practice, actions, decisions, deeds, how they in turn bring not just outward manifestation, but have definitive impact on our inner self. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Yeah? Like there's parts of your body outwardly that whether you are in control of them or not, they are definitively impacting your inner state. And what the Quran teaches us is not that Shaitan compels you to certain actions, but you are allowing for him to have entry point to become a sultan over you. And where you can have now control over parts of you that then become a guarded understanding so that Shaitan does not utilize them as a key to your inner self. Do you get what I mean? I want you to turn to the people next to you, if you haven't introduced yourself already, and I want you to talk about this now. What are some of the parts of your outer that our tradition speaks to us about that impact the inner? Does the question make sense? And then we'll come back and discuss. Just thinking about it, what are some of those and how do they impact the inner self? And then we'll come back and talk about it. So turn ideally in pairs, right? Not like more than 3 if you need to, but introduce yourselves to the person sitting next to you. And what are some of the key outer parts to us that then impact our inner state? And then we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. Go ahead. Okay, what are some of the things we're talking about so far? Like if you were to start to name some of these things, right? What are some of the things that you feel like? So where we left off in the text last week, kind of in the middle of the chapter, he says, know that the one who claims to have a thriving inward, but whose outward has been corrupted by his abandoning outward acts of obedience, is a pretender and a liar, right? And this is after he's talked about the relationship between the outward and the inward and how the outward follows the inward. But here now, we have actions that outwardly are not in accordance with what is kind of pleasing to the divine. Like, what are the things of our external self that we want to be mindful of? What did you discuss? What did you talk about? Yeah.
So we were talking about how at certain times when we're trying to pray, it is nice to limit certain sensory input. So for example, it's nice to be in a quiet place so you can focus on your spirituality. It's nice to minimize visual distractions, and also at the time it's nice to be able to keep things like clothing simple, because that can also be a distraction during that time.
Great. So here now are 2 things that you can specifically name, that if you are not mindful of them, of what are called the jawarih, your limbs, that are in a place where you are not in control, Shaitan will use them as a key to your inner self. Right? So one is your ears, your hearing, and another is your eyesight, your vision. Right? What are other things before we start to take a deep dive into some of these in specific? So you have your ears and your eyes, and you want to see kind of the logical progression through which you land on something. Right? It doesn't mean you have to have a rote memorized list that already just comes, but you're thinking about scenarios, and then you extrapolate from it opportunity that says, well, what creates distraction? What creates an absence of focus? So you have hearing and seeing, so namely on your outer self, your ears and your eyes. What else?
The tongue.
The tongue, yeah, this is number 1, right? In every hadith that talks about limbs, right? The tongue is what's going to drag people to Jahannam. May Allah protect us from this, right? The tongue is something that is like a main accessory for either upliftment or for kind of bringing somebody down. So the tongue, the ears, the eyes, what else?
What you do with your hands.
The hands, yeah. Your hands, definitely, right? You can use your hands for a lot of different things, right? Al-Muslimu man salima an-nas min lisanihi wa yadayhi. That the Muslim is the one from whom mankind is protected from his tongue and his hands. And we'll go into each of these a little bit more. So now we have 4, right? A tongue, ears, eyes, and hands. What else?
Every part of the body can be subject of.
But broader categories of things, of your extremities, your limbs, right? Yeah, definitely like every part could, but main things, yeah.
Can we say that the qalb, heart, or heart, like the feelings of the soul?
The spiritual heart is still a part of your inner self, right? So we're talking about just outer things right now that impact the spiritual heart, right? So what are, yeah?
Genitals?
Yeah, sexual organs, definitely, right? What else? So now we have 5. There's 2 more.
Would your stomach be on that list?
Stomach, right? And then 1 is left.
Feet too.
Your feet, your legs, right? I want you to think about these things now. These 7 things. Tongue, ears, eyes, hands, legs, stomachs, and sexual organs. Some are going to be more obvious than others. But again, talking to the persons you were talking to before, like how? How do these things bear impact? What are some of the ways, like shaitan can access through these things your inner self? Do you get what I mean? Because if you don't know how it works, it doesn't still mean that it's not doing something, right? You don't fundamentally have to understand the process of things for those things to happen. If I asked each of us right now in this room, do you really understand how your inner physical organs function? Do you have a base idea or a detailed idea of what's really happening when you consume a morsel of food and it goes through your body from start to finish? You see? And so you don't need to know. You just throw the food in your mouth and subhanAllah, the body just does what Allah intended for it to do. You don't have to know what's going on, right? You don't really have to know what's happening when your brain is clearing out its clutter and junk while you're asleep. It's just sending all kinds of things to clear out the gunk so you have more kind of cleanliness in your brain physiologically, right? You don't have to know how the medicine works. You just take the medicine. Somebody else is telling you this is what you do for this and this is what you do for that. There's certain things, though, that we are just organically using that if we're not mindful of how we're using them, it doesn't mean that there's not other entities that are then using it against us. You see what I mean? And so when you buy into Islam as a religion, you buy into the parts that you can fully comprehend and the parts also that are just beyond capacity to understand, but recognizing that these 2 things, that there's certain things that, like, I don't know why there's 3 rak'ahs in Maghrib versus like 7. Like, how do you know? How do you know why there's 2 rak'ahs at Fajr instead of 4? Right? How do you know? But you do have the capacity to know what the impact is of your tongue and your eyes and what you consume audibly and visually. Do you see what I mean? You just have to want to know, like, how those things can actually function. It's not a knowledge that is beyond our capacity to understand. You just gotta think about it sometimes. So these 7 entry points that become now keys through which shaitan can access your inner self, how does that actually work, right? What are the kind of things we want to think about? And so if you turn to the person next to you, pick whatever ones you want to of the 7, and however much time we kind of talk about this for a few minutes, But you start to think out its functionality. Like, what's really going on here? Do you see what I mean? And then we'll come back and discuss. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Okay, so what are some of the things we're talking about so far? Why don't we start with the tongue? Whoever talked about the tongue, like what are some of the things that you talked about?
Eyes.
You talked about the eyes?
Yes.
Okay, let's start with the eyes.
So like, let's see, like, so now we live in a digital world, and like, for example, I'm sure a lot of people here, like, they use Instagram and other social medias, and what I talked about when I was like, a little younger, let's say high school, like, I would sit, it's like New York City, summertime, I would sit in my apartment and I would just like scroll down on Instagram and I would see my other friends, like, for example, going to really cool places for vacation, and I just like, it would affect my inner state, saying like, I would start complaining inside my head, like, oh my gosh, these people are going to this place and I'm here in my apartment, and I just like made that small connection. I don't know if it
Yeah.
works.
Visual consumption is something that with modern technological advancements, it's like crazy intense, right? You are seeing arguably in a given day imagery in an exponentially larger quantity than people ever consumed in their lives ever. And every time you are taking in some of that imagery, it's like sitting somewhere, right? You want to think about our tradition, talks a lot in kind of analogies, illustrations, utilizing things elemental, right? The stars, the sun, the moon. The Prophet ﷺ makes a lot of analogies to like trees and seeds. These are things that you give now a bombardment that take deep root, essentially. And if we were to go out into, forests that have trees that are as large as can be, the ability to now cut them down at their roots is not the easiest of things, right? If you've ever walked through a place when you're hiking somewhere and a storm has knocked something down, the likelihood that it was uprooted with all of its roots taken out is very unlikely, but on occasion when you've seen it, this is massive. Right? So now if you're in a place where you don't want to think about the impact of the eyes as purely being like, oh man, you're looking at something pornographic, or you're looking at somebody that's half dressed. But every time you recite like Surah Falaq, you're in a place where you're seeking refuge from hasad, right? You're seeking refuge from envy. You can go online and see people who curate an entire life that is worthy of Instagram and what its algorithms would allow for one to have of momentary bursts of just kind of complacency. But it's just very subtly now giving shaitan the entry point through that consumption to deepen a seed into this massive tree in your heart that is filled with, may Allah protect us, just jealousy and envy, right? Or self-deprecation. Look at how beautiful everybody else is, I'm so ugly. Look at how successful everybody else is, I don't have anything. Look at how happy everyone else is, I'm miserable, I'm alone. I don't have like somebody like that in my life. I don't get to go visit all of these places and do all of these things. And you want to think where it's at and what the alternative is in relation to it, right? When we went for Umrah a few weeks ago, I took my children, we went with 3 other families. We had kids who were 6 to 12 with us. 4 families went. And there was a little girl who was like 6 or 7 years old. She saw the Kaaba, she couldn't stop crying. And I went over to her, it was the first time she saw it, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she was crying, and she was nodding her head still. Like little kids cry, and it's like this like ugly crying, like snot coming out of their nose, and that's how she was crying. And I was like, "Why are you, what's going on?" She said, "I'm so happy." I'm like, "Are you?" Right? And I was like, "Well, why?" She's like, "It's the Kaaba, and you can just sit and stare at it, and you get ajr for it. Our tradition tells us, right? You look at your parents the same way. You just by looking at them, You know, you look at things of beauty, right? I was in the Bahamas for a program, which is amazing, and I told our staff today that we're not doing retreats to like campsites in the woods anymore. We're going to Puerto Rico and the Bahamas because it's like a crazy experience, mashallah. And we're standing over this beautiful water, and it's just creating this serenity as it's hitting with the tide against the sand, and this like unobstructed view of the moon shining down upon us. And we're at this dinner on this last night. We're raising money for Syrian refugees. May Allah make things easy for the people of Syria. And everybody that was there, 700-800 Muslims at this thing, in this resort, had just eaten this meal outside. And I stood on the stage and I said to them, did any of you actually see the moon? And I said, just look at the moon for a little bit. And when you have hadith where people are comparing the beauty of the Prophet ﷺ to the moon, they got to first look at the moon in order to make that comparison. And they're looking at it from these eyes, not looking at it through the kind of visual aid from something like this. And so that balance there of what is something that's going to create detriment and something that's going to create benefit necessitates recognizing, firstly, that all of this is impacting me. My son is 7, Kareem. He really likes this song that my wife played for him some months ago that's in an Indian movie. I don't know if any of you watch Indian movies. I don't know if any of you are like, oh man, music is haram. That's a separate conversation. So my 7-year-old wanted to watch this movie. And so my wife, my daughter, and my son, they started the movie. They were all super excited because of this one thing that they heard from this movie. And I had stepped out, I was doing something, and I came back, and I know my babies really well. And I looked at my son's face. He clearly was not happy. And I said, Kareem, what's wrong? And he was like, nothing, Baba. And I said, tell me what's happening. And in the movie, the father was a character, and the child of the father had irritated the father, and the father yelled at him, and then the father, astaghfirullah, strikes him in the face. My son had never seen something like this before. May Allah forgive us for allowing for him to see something like this. And he just couldn't hold it in. You could just see the pain it was having on his little heart. He said, Baba, how could a father do this to his son? I said, I don't know, Kareem. I really honestly don't know how to answer that question. How a parent could ever raise their hand on their child. I don't know. My child had never seen that before. And the impact of it was now just apparent, most obvious on what it was doing to his inside. What do you think is happening to your heart? The amount of imagery of bloodshed you see, people killing people, and in fictitious and non-fictitious ways. When you're not built to be able to consume this, let alone consume it at the pace you consume it every single day of your life, just by your eyes. We're not talking about the commentary that comes or anything else. When you see haram, it comes back to your heart. When you are witnessing it, you are consuming it. Constant consumer-driven marketing that bombards you from the minute you wake up until the minute you go. And it's crazy, right? We were trying to buy a washing machine and a dryer. And I opened up my Instagram and all the sponsored ads are washing machines and dryers. I'm like, what is going on here? I was with my daughter and one of her friends at a soccer practice they had in the summer, and her friend's father, they're trying to get residency in Europe, and they're applying for it. And then on my social media, I got all these ads that were inviting me to become a resident of Germany. Why am I trying to be a resident of Germany? The thing is picking up on it, and then it's showing me because it knows the image is going to stick. It's going to stay there. Do you get what I mean? And this is where shaitan utilizes as a key to your inner self. And you got to be smart about it, how your eyes relate to what's going on within you. And it's not a joke, it's a reality. If you bombard yourself with certain imagery, it's going to then create itself as like a slideshow in your mind and in your heart. So you want to be smart about the things that you look at. And you want to be smart about the things that you also purposely don't look at. Does this make sense? What do you think? Yeah.
You know, I was thinking the same thing. For example, just drawing upon what she said, that for us, people who consume so much online content every day of our lives, for me, it's not so much as what I'm deliberately consuming, but most of the time it's something that, you know, I'm just mindlessly consuming. It's not something that I actually chose, you know. And you know, whenever I always write down what I did in the day, and when I go back on it, there are some days that I absolutely did nothing, but it seemed like I was doing something. And for example, when we use the cell phone, it could just take you hours, and you have this feeling of, you know, a purpose, and you feel like you're doing something, and you keep going on and on and on, not knowing when to stop. And then when the day ends, then I realized, oh my God, what did I do? And I've probably done nothing, but just consume absolute trash. And I didn't even, you know, deliberately choose it. I just let it consume me rather than the other way around.
If you become numb to it, it doesn't mean it doesn't have impact still, exactly. Right? You know, I used to play sports, and one of the sports I played before I got injured was I ran track. I was supposed to play in college, and I had a trainer. And they used to sometimes make me train literally like I would run until my feet started to bleed. I will not show you what my gross looking feet look like these days, but like you could stick like a fork in my foot and I wouldn't feel it, right? It doesn't mean that sticking a fork in my foot is a good idea, right? Just because I don't feel it, it doesn't mean that it's not going to screw up my foot if I stick a knife or a fork in it. Do you get what I'm saying? Just because you've seen so much of it and you don't feel the impact. You're not crying the way Kareem cried when he saw for the first time somebody commit that atrocious act of domestic violence. He shouldn't have seen it as a child. But he saw it, and then immediately you saw the impact that a clean heart has when it views something haram like that. Do you get what I mean? If you've seen it again and again and again, the fact that it's not eliciting response doesn't mean that it's still not bearing impact. Just because you could turn on a screen and you could see things that are deeply problematic doesn't mean that it's still not doing something to you. That's why I said, you don't know how the food flows through your body when you take a bite of it, and you can't explain, most of us, like what's really going on. So the eye is connected to the heart. The eye is connected to your inner self. You have to purposely want to be in a place where you buy into the notion that says, like, this visual imagery is going to connect me in this way. And at the other end of it, it's not just about the avoidance of what is negative, but about embracing what is positive. Look at things of beauty, like real beauty. Look at things that are just going to be innately, inherently, things that uplift you. If you have the blessing of being in a part of the city where you can go to the roof of a building, go and look at the stars. See what the New York City skyline looks like. A city that is concrete still has its own innate beauty in it. You just got to look for it. I've lived here in this area for more than 20 years. And there's still blocks of the city that I walk down, and I sometimes look up. My kids are like, Baba, look at that. I'm like, man, I haven't seen that, and I've lived here for 20 years. I've just never looked up at it. You get what I mean? And then you sometimes have to create the opportunities for it. So you wake up at Fajr to see the sunrise, because the sun doesn't know how beautiful it is, and it can't perceive its own beauty. You can see the beauty in the sunrise. It can't see itself, right? Do you get what I mean? Eyes are a big part of it. They're the third on the list of limbs in terms of the keys that shaitan has to you. right? See what's good and don't look at what is not good. Does it make sense? Is that simplistic? But that outer has an impact on your inner, and it can become a gateway for shaitan. What else? Other than the eyes. We mentioned 7 things. What was one of the other things you discussed? Yeah.
The tongue, and how we tend to say certain things that can be hurtful to others. But in contrary, we can also say things that can acknowledge the accomplishments of others as well. We also use our tongues for supplications, for prayer, and all those good deeds contribute a lot to your inner self.
Yeah, think about how this is a vehicle for shaitan, right? You ever get to a place where somebody says something really stupid to you, and you're like, man, you are not going to talk to me like that. Who's somebody you yell at? Don't tell me, but tell yourself. Somebody that you are okay arguing with and raising your voice. It doesn't start with the voice being raised. You get to a place where the onset of the conversation might have agitation or irritation or something, but somebody does something that throws it off, and here's like the entry point of shaitan. And you might come back at the same level, but then it starts to escalate and escalate and escalate. Bilal radiallahu an and Abu Dhar radiallahu an are going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, speaking words, emotions escalate, and then Abu Dhar calls Bilal the son of a black woman, in a way as if that's derogatory. And what's crazy is that they're both black, that Abu Dhar is a black Arab, and he's essentially calling Bilal the son of an African. And then they both stop, because they both become awake to what was just said. But the entry point to the escalation becomes now the vehicle of shaitan. It's bringing you from here to here to here to here. Somebody has to interject mindfulness. And why all of these are related, the mindlessness of the scrolling that you are doing that seems like it's not harming anybody, it's strengthening the muscle of mindlessness. So that now when you're in a place where you need presence, presence is not what you're actively working on. You don't have to be conscious for something to exist in a strong way. You could do something unconsciously and still strengthen it, right? So if you are deliberately creating focus, and you've never done that in your life, it doesn't mean that for years you haven't lived and you've organically developed the strongest amount of an absence of focus that you could have. You see? And the tongue is crazy. It is like something that is not a joke. There's a hadith where the companions ask, Ya Rasulullah, can somebody be a believer and commit zina? And he says, perhaps, yes. And they say, can somebody be a believer and steal or rob? And he says, yes, perhaps. And they say, can somebody be a believer, a mu'min, and lie? And he says, no, not this. You can't. The sins of the tongue, you could go on a laundry list of what they are. Gossiping, backbiting, lying, cheating, racism, cursing, yelling, screaming, abuse, on and on and on. So the default setting for us is Man kana yu'minu billahi wa bil yawm al-akhir falyakul khayran aw liyasmut, that whosoever habitually believes in Allah in the last day, let him speak good or be silent. So you open your mouth if there's khair to it. Otherwise the default is you don't say anything, just don't talk. Silence is a key ingredient to spiritual increase. Because you can't learn if you're not listening. And if you're speaking, there's no way to listen, right? I want you to just think for a second, because all of these things will also have a connection to them in different ways, right? The tongue relates to the ears because you're hearing somebody's speech. The eyes relate to the tongue because you are seeing the impact of somebody's words. You are witnessing like what that person's words are saying. You see? And it's not just content, but it's about the mode of communication, the non-verbalized aspects of it. Somebody could say something very nicely and very calmly, and they're still being a jerk. The Prophet ﷺ, he spoke with a distinct mode of speech. It was remarkable. His speech was in a language that we're not even talking right now. Concise statements with deep meaning, translated into every language you can imagine, and even through translation, they still impact people. How does somebody talk like that? Let alone he was speaking to people 14 centuries ago, and his words still resonate deeply with millions of people, billions around the world, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Think for a minute how you are in control of your tongues, how you are in control of your speech. Right? A child is limited in their ability to express. They just can't. They're going to cry at anything because they don't have words. They don't have vocabulary. They don't have anything other than that mode of expression. As you grow into adulthood, you now have different capacities to express. And one of the things is that you have to choose to express with dignity and grace. And so in certain things, there's just always ugliness. It is never okay to gossip about somebody. You are not gossiping or backbiting or revealing someone's sins if there's purpose to it, right? If somebody is going to marry someone and you know the person they're going to marry is a murderer, you cannot say, I can't say something bad about somebody. That doesn't demonstrate understanding of the deen. If you're going to sit with a psychologist, a therapist, a counselor, you're in a situation of abuse, you do not have someone manipulate text to tell you that your silence is important because you can't reveal somebody's sins. No, you can't live in hell because somebody is not honoring the rights that you have over them. That's not what we're talking about here. You see what I mean? There's a lot of hadith that just talk about like the dangers of the tongue being what it is that's going to just bring people to pits of chastisement. May Allah protect us from it. And that if you can control your tongue, then you're good. You bring yourself to a place where it's not that, oh, when I'm sitting with my friends, I'm just going to say things and joke and whatever, or I'm sending a text message to somebody that is just a different expression of my words and nobody else's eyes can see it. The angels on your shoulders see it. Your tongue itself is going to testify on the day of judgment. But for the purposes of this conversation, where we're talking about the inner and outer self, you are giving shaitan an open door to your heart. You're saying, just come in, man. It's yours. I don't even want it. And so you got to take a breath sometimes and say, is the nonsense that I'm about to word vomit into the world something that I really want on my record when I stand in front of the divine? If the answer is no, just don't say anything. Somebody wants to fight with you, you don't have to fight back with them. You be in a place where you take steps away. And if you're in a place where you are compelled, the Prophet got angry, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not that he did not get angry, but he got angry at the things that made sense. And those things of anger were usually when he saw injustice, inequity, oppression, or abuse. He didn't mince words about that these things would be haram, to put people in a place of recognition. Do you get what I mean? The tongue is a really important thing that you want to have control over. And you cannot, say that this is somebody else's responsibility, right? The way that I could literally take your hand and pull you towards something, I cannot speak your words, right? You are the only one that speaks what comes from you. So you play a role in then choosing what it is that is going to come, how it is expressed. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? And in retrospect, you look back and you say, what was it that brought up that agitation, that anger? So at least you're learning from the situation. Do you get what I mean? Anything else that people have that they discussed on the tongue, and how that's an important thing for us to think about in terms of the outer and the inner. And on the other end of it, right? You uplift people, you bring them healing, you bring them recognition. Give salams to everybody. Say hello to people you know and hello to people you don't know. The people who work in your buildings, like, do you know their names? How do you not know their names? Just really think about it. The guy that holds your door open, if you have a doorman at your building, somebody who, like, you see every day that sells you coffee, somebody that is a regular driver of a bus that you're on, have they ever heard you speak to them? Like, why not? Right? Some of you know the officers' names who are downstairs signing people into this building, but some of you don't. Why? Why do you not? And I'm not saying this to point, I don't know who does and who doesn't, right? But I'm saying to you, ask yourself, why? Why did God give you this tongue? Why did He give you the ability to speak, other than to speak wellness into the world? The last part that I'll say about the tongue is sometimes the challenging, like, conversations are not the ones that we are speaking out into the world, but how we are speaking back into ourselves. If I was to ask each one of you to tell me 5 things that you like about yourself, it would probably be a very hard endeavor for some of you. If I was to tell me like a few things that you love about you, versus if I said, tell me the things that you don't like so much about yourself. There's a problem. And you could talk to yourself in a way that then constructs now perspectives of the self, core beliefs, and you literally are speaking these things. Do you get what I mean? Knowing how this thing functions and knowing why it's at the top of every list. It's in a lot of hadith that the Prophet speaks about in terms of the heart, in terms of your inner self, in terms of your placement in the next world. Knowing these things, then you'll understand why Shaitan uses it as much as he does to be able to access people's inner self. Does this make sense? What else? We talked about the tongue, and we talked about eyesight. Any other things that people talked about?
We spoke about hands as well, yeah.
The hands? What did you guys say?
We said like it's like how you execute your force. You can do anything with your hands. You can do some bad and good things with both your hands. Yeah, the person said you can even kill somebody or kill yourself, or you can do too many bad things with your hands.
Yeah, subhanAllah. You can kill somebody with your hands. That's crazy. It's crazy the amount of ways that humanity has developed to actually kill other people. And the kind of mindset that people have, right? I had somebody send me an excerpt from Prince Harry's new book. And in it, he has a passage where he talks about being a pilot and fighting in against the people of Afghanistan. May Allah grant them ease and liberate our sisters in Afghanistan and end the problematic, skewed interpretation of Sharia that is limiting the rights of women there. And he wrote in his memoir, in his book, that he killed 25 Afghani people. And they describe the technology in the plane that he's flying that you can actually see to ensure that it was a real kill. So he said, I know that I killed 25 of them, because that's part of like what they were supposed to do and trained to do. And he said, I don't feel pride, but I also don't feel remorse. And then he goes into it by saying that essentially the way he is motivated to do this as kind of a retribution for 9/11 and those attacks. And you see then the link between the inner self and the hand. And how many people have been killed all over this world? Subhanallah. You see what I mean? And the hand gets used quite often when we don't use the tongue well. I was doing a small speaking tour in Toronto in Canada, and in this tour there were different people speaking, and one of the people speaking was a well-known munshid, nasheed artist, a singer by the name of Dawood Warnsby Ali. Do people know Dawood Warnsby Ali? You know him? Does anybody else know him? Yeah, most of you don't, some of you do. He has these like really great nasheeds. They are like nice, they're not corny, right? They're good. And like, you know, they sound good. He's got a nice voice. But if you meet him in person, he is like the most polite, well-mannered human being you'll ever meet in your life. Like I've never met, I can't say never, but there's like handfuls of people that I've met who are just like good, nice human beings. He is definitely one of them. May Allah preserve him. And he got on stage in one of the parts of this tour we were doing. He started to sing. And he told everybody to sing along with him. And he's on stage, he's singing. He said, "You guys sing too." And everybody started clapping their hands. And then he stopped singing. And he said, "You know what's a part of the problem? Is that people, they don't know how to use their words anymore." And he says, more often than not, we turn to using our hands where we need to be using our words. And quite often, those hands then turn into weapons against rather than support systems for the people around us. And I want you to think about it within the frame of even what I was talking about before, right? How can a person hit another person willfully? A parent hit a child. In even instances, children hit their parents. How? Like how? What brings that about? Other than something chaotic going on inside of you. And once you do it, and you act upon it, do you see how it becomes an entry point for shaitan? Why did my husband hit me? Why did you hit me? Oh, well, you shouldn't have done this to me. You made me angry. Is that coming from your heart or is it coming from your nafs? Do you get what I mean? Right? And then the act creates the opening for like more of the waswasa, more of something else, to just double down. And it becomes concrete. I made a justification like you were the reason as to why I killed those 25 people because of what they did to us, right? What are you talking about, man? And then you think about on the other end of it, who gets the blessing of you extending a hand to them in their times of need? Does that hand have to match your hand in terms of country of origin, in terms of race, ethnicity, skin complexion? Or is it just another human's hand that I see and that I'm going to offer support where I can? And people need a lot of healing. There's a lot of people who are struggling. They might be walking upright, but their heart has been kicked and broken and beaten to the ground. And they're waiting for somebody like you to take your hand and make it a means through which they can get back up on their feet. You see what I mean? And so what you do with this thing is very important, because it becomes a key entry point. My son, right, he's still 7, my daughter's 10, so she's kind of a little bit, more aware of things. Sometimes my son, he does things, and I'm like, Kareem, why did you do that, bro? And he's like, I don't know, Baba. I was like, you did it, right? And he was like, I don't know. And I'm like, your hand is connected to you, Kareem. Your feet are a part of you. Your heart, your body, your mind, like all of it's connected. Your feet didn't decide to do what you just did. Like your hand didn't decide to do what you told it to do. You told it to do what it did, right? So why does the hand hesitate when it can be a source of upliftment? Why does it raise itself up in moments where it should be calm. Do you see what I mean? You see how the hand now can become an entry point for some of these things. It creates like a lot. And Shaitan's strategy is not just singular, it's multiple. So it can go on the other end, right? If you're in a place where you have met somebody who is in a situation of abuse, somebody has stricken them with their hands, with their words, and then you have now anxiety, I don't know what to do, Shaitan comes in. The starting point was a hand being raised, and he now tells you to tell platitudes to these people. Just have patience. And the tongue comes back into the picture, and it's saying something that makes no sense. The person was hit by someone else's hand, and you're telling them that they're the ones that have a challenge with sabr? Right? What are you saying other than, I don't really know what to say, but I don't know how to say I don't know, so I'm just going to throw out words that are ignorant, hoping that maybe whatever, but I'll get out of this awkward conversation, and I'll at least save face because I'll have said something that validates my passivity. Do you get what I mean? They're all connected to each other. Go do good things with your hands. Go buy some seeds and plant some trees. The Prophet ﷺ, he tells us that when you gently have your hand go over the head of an orphan, that for every follicle of hair there's an ajr. When you're in a place where you have somebody that is weeping and crying and you're there giving them just tissues to wipe away their tears, let alone their tears. You have a child and you're blessed with a child, don't have somebody else raise that kid. You throw your child up and down in the air. Use those hands to express love. Like make meals for people that you love and put barakah into it because they're coming from your hands. Eat from the hands that are parts of people that know you so that you're not just going out to restaurants where you're a dollar figure, but there's barakah because there's love coming from the hands that are preparing food for you. Do you get what I mean? Use your hands to do chores in your house. Use your hands to be a source of benefit. But don't ever use them to hurt people. Don't ever make them a means through which you can do something bad to someone. And what you said, can you remind me your name, brother? I'm sorry.
Eagle.
Eagle?
Yeah.
Yeah. What Eagle said is really important to understand. You're at this spectrum. A hand has the capacity to take a life. You can kill with a hand, subhanAllah. And then on the other end of it, it has the capacity to bring a source of healing and restore life to individuals. Right? What else? We talked about 3 so far: the tongue, the eyes, and the hand. What about the others?
Legs can bring you in the wrong place.
Your legs?
Yeah, can bring you in the bar.
Yeah. You're walking to these places, you're going through these places, your feet are traveling, you have conscious awareness, right? This is why this text is a roadmap. If I know that I can cut through this place and it's going to be something that's going to expose me to things that are problematic, and I got to walk 5 extra steps or 10 extra minutes to go around it, to avoid it, then walk the extra steps. You can say it's not a big deal, but it's the same idea. Just because I can't feel anything in my feet doesn't mean I should go step on a nail. So just because you can walk through the streets of some parts of this city and you are bombarded with all kinds of things doesn't mean that you want to have your legs compel you to go through that, right? There's a hadith Qudsi where Allah Azza wa Jal says, right? These are sacred hadith. They follow a construct that the Prophet says, that Allah says, that essentially that we have the capacity now to be so close to the divine that he says, I become the ears through which he hears, and the eyes through which he sees, and the hands through which he touches, and the legs through which he walks. And in some narrations he says, and the tongue through which he speaks. And so your legs, they have that capacity. to have you kind of walk through places, lead you to places that they just don't make any sense for the rest of your being, right? And you think about it as a journey. So walk to places that have goodness to them. Don't walk through places that are going to be problematic. So we have the eyes, the tongue, the hands, the feet. What else? We have left the ears, the stomach, and the sexual organs. What do we talk about in any of those?
I think the stomach, for me, for example, when you eat, because even if you're eating halal things, even if you eat a lot, you're so inflamed, and it, at some point when you're consuming too much and you're eating really inflammatory foods, it brings you to a place that gradually puts you away from all the good things. And it creates a distance between them. And for example, then you have to do those prayers, and everything takes an extra effort for you. And it's harder to wake up in the morning and be clear-headed. When you're foggy-brained, it's hard to be mindful and be in a good mood with everyone. If it has all those effects on your body.
Yeah. What else about the stomach? Anything?
You can eat things that are haram, and that can affect you.
You can eat things that are haram, and that can affect you. You can eat things that are permissible, that can affect you, as I was saying before. What else?
Fast.
You
could fast.
Yeah, you can fast, and that can be, for people who have the physical means to fast. The stomach is the organ that can be very defining of your decision making, right? We pursue wealth, we pursue degrees, credentials that are rooted in cultural kind of norms that make us potentially like better candidates for spouses and partners. And that's fundamentally a big part of why we pursue the things that we pursue. We eat at certain places, not just because of the quality of the food, but to be able to say, I went and I ate at that place, right? To have like stature to us. The amount that we eat is going to vary from person to person, right? All of us have different relationships with food. But when you are in a place where you control the stomach and the stomach does not control you, then you can be in a place where you likely are in control of pretty much anything else. The stomach is also the seat of like pretty much all sickness. And if you don't have awareness to it, right? It doesn't mean about permissible and impermissible, but you think about how certain foods impact you, what they do to you. A good friend of mine, he went on this diet that was called the GAPS diet, and he essentially just removed all foods from his diet for a while, other than he was just eating broth of like a chicken. And the idea was that he was completely like kind of detoxing his body of things, and then slowly he and his family members would introduce like different foods individually to see how they individually responded to those foods. His young daughter had eczema. Eczema completely went away. They have different things that they all eat together, and then some of them, a family of like 6, that they will eat certain things, and then individually some of them react to different things in different ways. And how you can see for yourself like its impact and what it then does. And a lot of us make like these decisions. The world makes decisions that are rooted in exploitative systems, that our tradition is based on this idea that food for 1 is enough for 2 and food for 2 is enough for 4. But the conventional systems will tell you that yeah, people shouldn't be hungry, but if you ask, well, why are they not getting food? Everybody's going to call you like a socialist or a communist or this or that. They shouldn't be hungry, but I can't take food off of my plate. Your entire being now is attached to this thing. And it has impact on your mood. It has impact on your feelings. It literally is doing stuff to your brain. You might not want to hear it, but you don't have to buy into it for it to be true. And then you think about what it does to you overall, and where like shaitan interjects himself. And you put a morsel of food in because you want to eat it so badly, you could care less as to what the supply chain was like and what a laborer had to go through in order for you to eat that thing. You could care less if the restaurant worker that's back there is getting a fair wage or not. We had a brother that came here who was Shia from Pakistan, an asylum seeker. He wouldn't walk into the Islamic Center. I had to go downstairs to meet him with his social worker and a lawyer. He was here in the country as an asylum seeker because most of his family had been killed, targeted killings of Shias. He had to pretend like he was Sunni to go into many mosques. And now he was there because he was petrified. Do I have to be Sunni here or not? I went down to talk to him. I spoke to him in Urdu. He was talking a little bit, still very hesitant. I called Sheikh Fayaz Jaffer, who works on our staff. I said, can you talk to this guy? And he spoke to him. And aside from everything else that we talked to him about, and what I just shared with you of his story, because he was here as an asylum seeker and did not have residency status, he did not have access to abundance of funds. So he was working in a fast food place off the books where they were literally paying him $2 an hour. How do you live in New York City on $2 an hour? Let alone the trauma he's sustained, all of what he's going through. Where is the barakah in that sandwich that you're going to eat from that place? And you don't think it impacts your spirituality? And if shaitan tells you to satisfy your stomach before you're caring about everything that goes in to the building of that sandwich, how is it not an easy entry point for him then into your being? Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Does it? Like there's a verse in the Quran that says, وَثِيَابَكَ فَتَحِرْ, that your thobe, your clothing, make sure that it's clean, it's pure. And it's like in the literal sense, you don't have stains and like whatever else, in other sense. But one of the interpretations the Mufassirin give of that is that you wear clothes that its entire supply chain has like purity to it. There's no labor right issues, no like sweatshops that go into this. Do you see what I mean? And then if you're a doctor in this room, you know better than I do, but a lot of like the illness we face and the sickness we face is not about like supremacist ideas of beauty. If you are, somebody who is a little more stout or skinny, all of us are beautiful. And that's just from Allah. You don't want to have wellness that's attached to vanity, but wellness that's attached to actual health. To be in a place that recognizes that a lot of what creates for us physical, emotional, and mental, and even spiritual wellness issues is rooted in the stomach and what's going on in our stomach. You don't have healthy bacteria in your stomach, you got all kinds of gross stuff in your stomach, eating too much sugar that's creating like crashes in your system, making you crave it, putting you in a bad mood. Is a candy bar really worth all of that? And that's what it does. Modern health will tell you that 3 days is enough to just kind of restart your system. And we have sunnah fasts that are the middle days of the month. 3 days. It just reboots your system. The cravings kick out. You don't eat so much sugar for just a minimum amount of days, you're going to see the inflammation in your faces go down. Inflammation in other parts of your body go down. Not because you are not beautiful. You are as beautiful as you can be. I say to my kids all the time, will you love me if, I look like this and I'll puff my cheeks up? Right? They'll be like, Baba, don't be silly. Right? But you are. You're beautiful, and that's where your tongue comes in and how you talk to yourself. You have to do it for health reasons. I've seen enough of my relatives get to a place where in their older age, they suffer a lot. Issues attached to poor eating habits, diabetes, like stomach issues. They can't like walk properly. It's all because of diets at the end of the day, right? And so the stomach becomes an entry point to it. You had a time historically where a lot of the Western world, they thought beauty was rooted in obesity, not because, again, we want to have like simplistic understandings of beauty, but because obesity denoted wealth. That you had all these rich white people that were living in like the kingdom of Christendom, you know, however many centuries ago, and they found beauty in having a overweightness to them because that's how they knew that they were rich. And it was the poor people that were not of like the privilege of being overweight. It's crazy, right? You gotta remember who your teacher is, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He didn't eat so much. That's okay. You just know your relationship to food. You use the tongue to talk positivity to yourself. Whenever you look in the mirror, you're as beautiful as today you will be as you will be a month from now. Allah does not look at your forms. He looks at your hearts and your deeds. Look at those places. Do you get what I'm saying? But get the stomach in control. The last two things, the ears and the sexual organs. Did anybody talk about either of these? The ears are really important because they're not as easily kind of shut down as other things, right? Like when you were talking about, you know, having a quiet place to like pray, for example. So we talked about the ears a little bit, right? But when you are taught to be the prayer leader, you're taught, like shorten your prayer. The Prophet shortened his prayer when he heard a baby crying. He didn't want the mother to be, you know, kind of frantic, or the father, right? There's mercy in that. Do you see? But he can't hear the baby crying if you can't hear the baby, right? If you're leading the prayer and you make a mistake in the prayer, your recitation is off. Somebody behind you fix the recitation. You gotta be able to hear it in order for that to happen. If you like went down into sajda and you were supposed to stay kneeling, but instead you stood up, somebody behind you is going to say subhanallah. You have to be able to hear it, right? But the hearing in and of itself is something where, not in those situations. You come in here, it's Jummah time, it's Fried Chicken Friday, we pray, all the fara'id are done, and then you want to pray your sunnahs, and everybody's lining up to get some chicken. You're like, man, I wish these Muslims would just shut up, because I'm trying to focus. You cannot pray in a way where you block out the sound, right? But you could close your eyes. Can you close your ears? Do you have the capacity to make your ears fold into itself and then they are just shut down from sound? No, this is one of the reasons why our teachers say the Quran, when it talks about hearing and seeing, it quite often has hearing first and then it has eyesight. Because you can always like close your eyes. You can take your glasses off. There's different ways for you to deal with what's visual. The hearing part, it's just around you. What are you going to do? And we were talking before, right? Where these guys were saying, hey, I'm going to take notes on my phone, you know, and we were joking, and he was like, you know, how does this... I was like, it's not going to bother me. I said, you could stand up and start dancing. It's not going to bother me. And he said, well, how does that happen? And I said to him jokingly, like, you just learn to block out the noise. But that's also sometimes just what you got to do, right? You build a mental focus that you block out the noise. You stop listening to the noise and letting it be what pulls you in different directions. But here, like, you have to be smart about it. When you're consuming sound, sound is not like a thing to diminish. Like Quran is sound. You have people who don't even know what the words mean, and the sound is just compelling them in different ways. I took my son and my daughter to a Nets game last year. It was when Kyrie Irving returned back to the Nets, right? If people watch basketball, people know what I'm talking about, right? And so we didn't know, you know, and the ticket prices jumped from like $10 a ticket to like thousands of dollars a ticket. It was like, what happened here? Then we got there, Kyrie was playing, and it was packed. There was a lot of noise, and it was very loud. And there was a lot of sound and a lot of music. And And my son, who was then like 6, he was sitting there, and like every part of him is moving, right? I was like, Kareem, man, I didn't know you were such a good dancer. And he's like dancing, like his body's moving. He's like, Baba, I'm not dancing, right? And I took a video of him, and I showed him. And he was like looking at it perplexed. He didn't have to be consciously aware of what the sound was doing to him for the sound to do something to him. Do you understand? If you're ever in a place and you're walking, I'm not saying it's good or bad or right or wrong. I'm saying you just pay attention to yourself. The sound comes in, you automatically start tapping your foot. You start moving like a little bit. And then you become aware and you're like, oh my God, who's seeing me like doing this, right? But sound is a very intrinsic part of our tradition. This is what's given to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in recitation. Do you see what I mean? So you have to be that much more mindful, because you can close your eye, but you can't walk around like this all day, right? You can't be in a place where people are sitting around you, and then you just don't like what you hear, and you're like, right? They'd be like, that crazy Muslim is going to do something to us. So that much more consciously, you are mindful of what you are consuming through your ears. And you're not just being in a place where, because it's numb or desensitized, you pretend like it's not happening. A lot of us, as children, take in adult emotions to our hearts through our ears that no child should have to hear some of the things that some of us hear as children. And so you've consumed it, it's there, Shaitan will know how to manipulate it. You got to sit down and find the healing from it. That you remember like words of anger that were cast into your heart. And I'm sorry for those things. You can remember the first time somebody might have lied to you. Or sometimes somebody broke a promise. They made a joke at your expense. And you think about it on the other end of it, because it goes back to the tongue. What are people hearing that's coming out of your mouth? And all of these ears, they're going to testify on the Day of Judgment. Do you see what I mean? And the last piece, right? So we talked about the tongue, the ears, the eyes, the hands, the legs, the stomachs. The last piece is the sexual organs. And this is not a topic that you want to shy away from, nor is it a gendered topic. It's not what societally we understand, because our tradition is very explicit on these things, right? And it gives an insight that humans are going to be varied in what it is that we have in terms of our relationship to our physical needs. But the Prophet, for example, has hadith where he tells his male companions that if you are engaged in physical intimacy with your spouse, then make sure you engage in what is called foreplay, so that your wife's needs are met as well as your own needs. That you don't satisfy yourself, you're satisfying somebody else's too. Which means, aside from the Prophet giving advice to young men and giving like an insight to sexual ethics, that's all there in our tradition, you can derive from this that like men have needs and women have needs. We're not a religion that falls into this idea that a woman having physical needs is somehow then an okay thing to open a door and to go into slut shaming and all kinds of stuff. Does that make sense? And you want to be in a place where you have awareness of the self, so that you can then recognize also what the capacity is of the self. There are things that are fairly obvious that can be engaged in. But to understand that the impact back now comes back to the heart. And there's entire lists now about what Shaitan's strategies are. And with this thing of physical intimacy, sexual organs, sexual gratification, can create a lot of guilt amongst people. And what Shaitan's strategy is, as he uses these as keys to get through now layers of impacting yourself, and his primary goal is to get you to stop believing. And what is he trying to get you to stop believing in? Well, if he gets you to believe that your act is heinous enough that it puts you outside of those who can receive Allah's mercy. And that's a problem. The act in and of itself is not what the end is, but it's a means to get you to a certain mindset. You understand? And if you shy away from having these conversations with yourself, or to understand what your capacity is, you're going to just increase the guilt, and increase the remorse, and increase the self-hate, and increase the self-deprecation. I had 2 students here who ended up getting married to each other, but even if they didn't, that's okay. And while they were students, they weren't married, but they knew they wanted to be together. They were studying in the library one night, the big orange building, 2 buildings over, and he walked her home, and he didn't want her walking alone because it was late at night. She said, "Do you want to come and have some food?" And he said, "Sure." They went up, her roommate was not there, and one thing led to the next, and they committed zina. The next night, they're studying again, same thing. They made a commitment. This isn't going to happen ever again. We did something wrong. We're not going to ever do this ever again. So he walks her back. "You want to eat something?" "Yeah, of course, because we said we're not doing anything ever again." They go upstairs. The same thing happens. Now they're sitting in my office, and they're both like distraught. They hate themselves. They're saying like things, "We should just not ever talk to each other again. You know, maybe until we get married to each other," and all these things. I'm like, what are you trying to prove, man? That you don't love each other? And because you love each other, you want to do the things that people who are in love with each other will want to do. You have basic needs. You're now in a place where you understand your boundaries. Don't test yourself foolishly. So if you know that when you are alone in that situation, you're going to do something that crosses a boundary that you do not want to pass, then don't bring yourself to that situation. Do you understand? And shaitan's entry point is not just the committing of zina, but twice over now, they wake up and they hate themselves. And they've attached a negative trigger to something that's positive. Every time they look at each other now, they feel bad because I brought you to this. Maybe I don't deserve you. Maybe there's no barakah in our relationship. Maybe we should be away from each other. Shaitan has got a strong hold on them. And then every other thing. I'm not able to focus on my interview, my exam, this and that. Maybe Allah is punishing me because of this one thing that I did. It all just keeps going back to it. Do you see what I mean? That's how it's a key to your inner self. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? It's the same thing. You watch pornography. You're in a place where you're committed to like multiple spheres of this visual gratification. And it's crazy. Sometimes the hardest things will wake you up. There's a young man in our community. I remember I sat down with him and he was just like torn apart. And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I like watch pornography." And he said, "There's this one person who I would quite often watch, and as I Googled their name, I got an article that came up that said that they actually passed away from self-harm some months ago." And then he said to me, "I never realized until that point that this was actually a real person. And that they had the capacity to die. Let alone what they must have been feeling, that the means through which they left this world was taking their own life." Do you get what I mean? But when it's mindless, and when there's manipulation, and it's all about the physical, and it's all about the outward, and it just kills the heart, the heart then is in slumber. Because Allah is Al-Jabbar, can shake you up and to get you to wake up to reality. And so you think like within yourself. And if it's a hard conversation, find somebody to talk to about it. You talk to me, you don't like me, that's okay. I still love each of you. Or maybe you're not comfortable talking to me. That's okay too. I can refer you to someone. But you have to sit with these things and to understand, like these limbs, these outer parts to us, they create an entry point to the inner self. And you don't want to have imbalance inwardly. And it's a hard conversation, but the immediacy of gratification sometimes is going to have a trade-off. So if you feel good because you yelled at that child, then the trade-off is you're killing your heart. You understand? And then it's going to be harder to get to a place where there's that focus in that prayer, that genuineness to be charitable, like to feel love for others as well as to love yourself. Because you gave it up for 5 seconds of just yelling at a child, letting out your exhaustion, your stress, your tiredness on a loved one. Do you get what I mean? That could be an adult, it could be your spouse, it could be a friend, a sibling. There's a trade-off. You let it out, you feel good, but you hurt them, and you're also just hurting yourself back. Does that make sense? And this chapter on the outer and the inner self is important, because along the way, there's going to become exhaustion. There's going to become tiredness. There's going to be things that are going to be intriguing, flashy, glitzy. It's going to tell you, feed the physical, feed the physical, feed the physical. And nothing is telling you to take care of the inner self, to understand the relationship of the metaphysical to the physical, to know how to take care of your heart. And then all of these other things. I kill myself working so I could feed my stomach. I kill myself working so that I could be a potential spouse in order to have physical intimacy. I kill myself in pursuit of dunya to satisfy what is external and outward. And then the inner self just becomes neglected. You can't even enjoy what it is that you have in front of you. You're constantly just chasing after more and more and more to gain some semblance of satisfaction. You see what I mean? And then it bleeds in. I'm not eating well, so I'm not sleeping well. I'm not sleeping well, so I'm not able to drink like enough water. I'm not able to have good conversations. I'm always irritable, argumentative. My stomach brings me to a place of self-talk that renders self-hate, because the absence of physical wellness and physical care and understanding the physicality of it brings about emotions that make me feel as if I'm a bad person, nobody likes me. And I start to create now a core belief system that highlights and increases anxiety and agitation and all these kinds of things. And you're like, is it really that simple? Yeah, it is, man. Just say nice things to people. Don't just be in places where you are numb to what you are seeing and what you are hearing. Be smart about what it is that you're feeding yourself with and nourishing yourself with. Think about literally what the pathways are that you're walking around. I went to Puerto Rico like a year ago or 2 years ago, I don't remember. One of the first trips we took after COVID, I think. And I took my kids and my wife. And we went around New Year's time just for like 3 days. And it was nice, and the beach was nice, and everything was nice, alhamdulillah. But the hotel we were in had one entrance here and another entrance here. But the entrance here had you walk through a casino for a good like 50, 60 feet. We're not going to gamble, right? Don't worry if you're worried. I don't gamble. But there was a halal Turkish restaurant down the street, and we went to eat there, and coming back, it was just easier to get to our room if we were to walk through the casino. And my son and my daughter, they're much younger at that time, and they're like, Baba, we can go in through the hotel from here. My wife and I said, we're not going to have our babies willfully, from our kind of decision, walk through this. Because it wasn't just people playing games. They're like smoking, they're drinking, they're like engaged in like, and I'm not judging anybody. It's not about judgmentalness. It's about recognizing what it is that you're putting into your inner self. And so we had to walk like much more in a like kind of state of tiredness. But that's what we had to do. Because it wasn't just about us doing what would be for us. We're responsible for these young hearts that we're trying to take care of. You see what I mean? Now you think about that also, right? There's hadith that tell you, you make wudu in your home, every step you take to prayer in that state, one rank of elevation and one degree of kind of degradation is being taken off of your scales, right? Use your legs mindfully in those ways. Walk like in the pathways of volunteerism and charity. Bring your legs to things that are positive. You see what I mean? Does that make sense? All of these things. Just sit like over the next few days and just think about it. That's all you gotta do, is just think about it. How are you gaining control over them? And what is it that's creating an absence of control? And how do we like deal with some of those blocks? Does that make sense? Okay. So the rest of this chapter, we didn't really like read too much of it, just a couple more paragraphs. Imam al-Haddad, he talks about individuals who like are deeply focused on the refinement of their outward, but don't do anything for their inward. He says this is like rooted in ostentatiousness and things to that effect. We'll talk about that a little bit in the last part of it, where he says that one who is really serious about their inner self, would be in such a state where if all of their acts and deeds were presented to people, like they wouldn't be worried about it. They wouldn't be embarrassed. He talks about what you do in secrecy and why that's important and these kinds of things, right? And then we'll go into the next chapter, which I think is on awrad, like daily devotions, having a wird. And, a lot of that is about kind of time management, structure to your schedule, having consistency in habits, because essentially time management is management of the self, right? And then where and what you're putting your time into increases barakah, increases blessings, and allows for you to have that much more you can do with time. So it's not just like aimless and spontaneous. We'll see everyone next week. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
We hope you enjoyed our podcast. If you're inspired by the work that we're doing at the IC and want to help keep it going, subscribe to our podcasts, follow us on social media, donate to help support us at ICNYU.org, and most importantly, keep us in your continued du'as. Until next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.